so that both of you guys can explore your various positions. Before we get into that, make sure all of you out in chat land, go to Dono Chat if you want to send in a super chat for either of the debaters tonight. I don't know if it's linked. Actually, I better check and make sure it's linked at the top. But that's where you will be able to send in a super chat. It is there. Okay. Usually, you could just send it in on YouTube, but we're on the backup channel, so you can send in through Dono Chat. Of course, we'll be reading those off. We will be taking callers tonight after this debate is done. That way, you can put both of these gentlemen to the question. You can hop into the Discord if you want to do that. So, without further ado, the floor is open.
That's right, because it's all about the shekels. It's all about the shekels.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go. Go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, your argument is that matter doesn't account for knowledge. I do think that generally, whenever you structure some sort of philosophical groundwork, you have to take some axioms, just sort of you have to start with some sort of groundwork. And I generally agree with Descartes, who generally took knowledge and existence sort of as axiomatic, like that basically
Descartes
somewhere. And if we keep drilling
always
down
Descartes.
the ground, we just kind of drive ourselves crazy. So I don't know the issue with taking knowledge and existence as axiomatic. I don't know why that's an incoherent position. I can't. Is he muted? I think he's muted. I can't hear.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah. Is that better? I think
I can hear you now.
And now
Sorry.
Andrew's muted.
Okay, I can hear Jim and not Andrew.
Because knowledge itself, right, is not found in matter. So it's not identical to matter. There's nothing material about knowledge. There's nothing, and that's not even the only thing. Knowledge can't even be accounted for from the materialistic position because the very process of coming to knowledge or even making a proposition would just be the result of mechanics, biological, chemical, laws of physics, laws of nature. It would just be a consequence. So this concept of like thinking or coming to knowledge or evaluating truth claims or doing anything
Avian and Machine, feel free to jump in anytime.
I'm of dominoes falling.
Yeah, I'm listening. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's there to bite on yet. But I was just saying, like,
no, I mean,
like for me, like the first red flag is like Descartes and axiomatic is like, whoa, okay, so that's kind of a weird argument.
I actually agree with Jim Bob that knowledge has a kind of immaterial aspect.
Right.
So I agree with him there, and I actually, I don't think Descartes was very good to bring up, like, because Descartes is kind of like a dualist, or
right.
Yeah, because of the interaction problem. You know what I mean? Like that's the common thing. But yeah, I lean towards like a kind of panpsychism, neo-Lamarckian. I'm a neo-Lamarckian, which means a lot of materialists would hate me too, and as a consequence, I also am open to the idea of God more so, like some transcendent, something that emanates, or like pulses or something. Yeah, like a kind of pan-entheist or something. But yeah, we can continue watching the video. But so far, I'm more on Jen Bob's side, because I'm not a materialist at all. I'm not a materialist. Like,
Jen Bob.
Well, I'm sure that dude's age plays a lot into it. If I'm being honest, I can be a materialistic person. Who doesn't want to have nice things in life and be able to live peacefully and live comfortably? But there's a big difference between the younger generation and stuff. So.
No, the materialism in this sense means that everything is physical. Like it's like pinballs hitting each other.
I meant that too. I mean, yeah. I meant materialistic, like everything physical, flesh, like the need to buy, that kind of stuff. I mean, materialism in the sense is physical.
The need
the world
to
too.
seed.
That too, yeah.
Yeah, let me also say Buddhism is, or at least the school I follow, is incompatible with materialism. And there are a lot of, in my Sanka, there were a lot of people going around pushing materialism, like stuff like storehouse consciousness it's kind of like the soul because it's not 100% material. The storehouse consciousness, it has an immaterial aspect. The Linkavattara Sutra talks about that, but yeah, we can continue the video.
Similar to the bubbling of, say, a hot springs in northern Colorado. It's just a happening. So no, you couldn't take Descartes because if you're holding a materialist position or a naturalist position, you would actually have to find and isolate something called knowledge in the physical. If you appeal to anything that's not physical to then ascertain some truth or examine the external world, you're already outside of the naturalist paradigm. And that doesn't even we're not even talking about the fact that there's a mind in play that's examining things, which isn't also not found in nature.
A mind that's examining things isn't found in nature.
No.
Maybe I don't have a hard knowledge enough on philosophy to fully like understand your positions, but you're essentially saying that the mind and perceiving things in itself, like what do you account? I'm curious what you account for this outside of nature.
Well, what I account for is irrelevant to whether materialism and naturalism can account for the mind, which is the thing that's spotlighted today. We can get into that later, but I really want to cross-examine your position, which is to say, well, naturalism and materialism is coherent. Well, if coherent means consistent, if coherent means it accounts for knowledge, the existence of knowledge, the ability to apprehend and hold knowledge, the ability to hold two claims simultaneously together and then examine which one is more coherent, then naturalism can't do it. Because, again, materialism or naturalism, basically the consequence of it is that everything we're doing right now, the sounds coming out of our mouth, are merely the symptoms of strict mechanistic processes. And so if you say opinion A and I say opinion B, and then we leave it to some other person, we're calling a person, which in naturalism would just be a machine. If we leave it to them to examine the two propositions, the two opinions, their opinion is no different than ours. It's just a consequence of matter in motion. It's a consequence of strict biological law, laws of nature, laws of physics, chemical reactions. And I don't think a materialist or a naturalist can account for, let's just give can we give ourselves a mind, a thinking mind, a self, a brain, something that's not identical to just brain matter, that examines things and has access to knowledge, and the materialist and the naturalist can't do it.
I don't know. I sorry, and maybe we've just got the wrong person for this debate essentially. But I want to apologize. Just to begin with, but. From my understanding, I don't understand why it's so incoherent for us to basically just say that we have memories that are basically explained by neurons that are passing information through each other, and we make logical arguments based off of axioms that we pre-exist. I don't understand why we have to appeal to some sort of hidden third party source. I don't see a gap in knowledge. I don't see a yeah. Go ahead.
I don't think I want to clarify something.
Sure.
You're describing neurons and knowledge of neurons, right? Memories.
You use knowledge, and I don't know if I fully understand what you're referring to.
Do you have knowledge of something called a memory? Do we know what the concept of a memory is together? All three of us probably?
Sure,
right.
Sure.
So we have knowledge of what we call a memory, what we're referring to as a memory. What I'm saying is, as you describe the physical things that make up a memory, neurons firing, some crinkles in the brain, storing information that can be somehow gathered by a processing tool called the brain. What I'm saying is that even your assessment of that would also just be physical things happening. So us talking right now, us talking right now would just be the outcome of inputs. Like input, output. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So I want to know from your position, how is us talking and thinking and trying to figure out the truth of the matter, right? Using philosophy, using knowledge, using information, using the laws of logic, and these things. How is it different than water coming out of the ground?
How is it different? I don't know if it is different. I feel like we took. Go ahead.
I'm saying if it's not different,
okay,
then we don't have access to knowledge. And that therefore materialism is incoherent.
Walk me through that. So because you feel like I think that basically it's just inputs and outputs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we all of my behaviors are explained by some sort of predetermined
determinism.
base.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
100%.
Sure.
That you feel like knowledge can't be attained.
Right. Why? Because any any conclusion we come to would be determined by a mechanistic law-based system. So how would we separate what's the correct assessment of reality or philosophy or any description of reality or anything we come to and think of if it's no different than a bubbling water coming out of the ground? Then whatever you come to, right, in this debate, whatever I say, whatever you say, would be just determined from the inputs and the mechanism at work. How could it ever be not that?
I
That's
kind of
weird.
agree with that. Sure.
That's a little weird.
But you agreeing with that would just be caused by mechanisms. You understand?
Sure. Sure.
So you can't come to knowledge because a third person, let's say Andrew,
What do you mean it's weird?
and he was a listener
What do you mean?
going to decide.
I like to ask myself philosophical questions. You know, sometimes when I sit up late at night and I'm talking to God and to myself, just trying to get my bearings.
You mean you like to neurojack off? Okay,
yeah, buddy. I've often found I've asked myself before, what is it that really makes us human? What is it about a person that, you know, gives you a personality? What is it that makes you you? You know, why aren't we really just, you know, apes out in the trees throwing shit at each other and beating each other in the heads with rocks? What is it about us that makes us, you know, paint? What is it about us that makes us sing, to make us dance, to make beautiful clothing, you know, to do all the stuff that what we consider makes us human, that you know, they like to say that separates us from the animals, like they say about in John Wick. What separates us from the rules, Mr. Wick? I mean, what separates us from the animals is the rules. So I mean, I think it's funny that, like, you know, what he's talking about is something that I've been philosophically asking myself for a while, which is what really makes me who I am. Is it, you know, the people you choose to love? Is it the hobbies you choose to have? You know, it's just, it to me, it sounds, you know, I don't know Jim Bob on a personal level, but I mean, the dude, it does sound like he really is being legit, at least in this interaction of trying to get the guy to understand that, like, there's a lot of people, and no offense to you, Avian, you can believe in evolution or whatever, but, you know, I know some people who believe in evolution and believe in God. I'm on the fence about it. I think it can be and or. I don't think evolution completely negates God at all. But
let me say something though. The thing is, you have to understand, evolution has different theories. I don't support modern synthesis or extended synthesis. I am a neo-Lamarckian, and you know, throughout history, neo-Lamarckians were more likely to believe in God. Okay, there's a problem with evolutionary biology that I dealt with in the beginning. They don't believe in agency. They don't believe in biological agency. They don't believe in that life has any qualia or mentality. You know, they reduce everything to natural selection, and I'm against
that. Yeah, I know. That's why they're telling all the moms and stuff that their babies are just a clump of cells and parasites.
Well, think about it in the terms of, in Jurassic Park, he said life finds a way. Just as 3 words, or just as 4 words, basically indicate like willpower or like agency. Finds is something that you do with agency. It's not something that just happens without agency, right? So it's saying life will, you know, adapt essentially, but it's like, it gives it like a, maybe not personhood, but something.
Yeah, let's just go make a bunch of fucking dinosaurs and not care whether or not they might evolve one day to actually become the apex predator.
Also, I am agnostic about a special intervention, you know, like, because symbolic reference is very unique. You know, we don't see any other, you know, the swastika was not originally a bad symbol. You know, it was everywhere in the ancient world. You know, the swastika was meant to represent something that can only be explained by other symbols. You know, and the swastika, no other creature makes anything like a swastika or like a dharma wheel or like a cross, you know, because those are symbols that are meant to represent something more than what we see in the natural world, you know what I mean? And that kind of capacity, even Jesper Hoffmeyer, whose book I read, Biosemiotics, he says that capacity is very, you know, it's not easy. Like, if you were to study the natural world, you cannot really predict something like that could emerge. So it's a difficult question, like, how did symbolic reference emerge? But anyway, I wanted to address something else. You know, right now they're talking about what's called the explanatory gap, you know, which is like how you have like input and output, and yet, you know, people aren't zombies. You know, we have qualia, we have internal mental life. Like, the scientific worldview cannot explain it. And you have people like Patricia claim that your mind is an illusion. It's just created.
Well, don't
by-
worry, don't worry. You're just one puff of fentanyl away from being a zombie. So don't worry.
or
Like,
bath salts.
yeah, exactly. So those are some things exploring. This is an interesting video so far. We can keep watching it, or if people are tired, I can continue it some other time. We'll watch it a little bit more, I guess.
I just wanted to say that that's one of the reasons why I like Marvin the Martian so much. One of my favorite quotes by him is, "I think man is the most interesting insect on planet Earth." Basically, they think that they're a rational being. How absurd! So I don't know, y'all. Go ahead and play the video. It's just every day it's something.
Between us, which one he thought was right about
Sure.
about the world. Even his assessment would be determined. Therefore,
Correct.
it's endless, right? It's an
Yes.
endless, so you could never come to knowledge because there's no independent viewer or appraiser.
I think that you're presupposing that we understand, like, that you are. I think you're defining knowledge, and I don't know if I fully grasp your particular definition, because generally what I like, I would agree with all of your assessments that essentially all of my behaviors could be explained by some sort of past indicators or
Well,
you know, a chain of
determined.
dominoes. 100% determinism. Yeah.
Not
And that we don't
explained.
necessarily have free will.
No,
Yeah.
not explained though, because explained would assume we have knowledge. It would just be determined. It would just be, it is, right? So not explained, actually. It would just be determined. So an explanation, do you understand the consequence of the position is that an explanation post hoc of what is occurring would also just be determined.
I feel like you lost me. And I
If
apologize.
thinking-
I don't have a hard background in
It's okay.
philosophy.
If
Yeah.
thinking itself
Mhm.
and coming to conclusions and appraising
Hold on,
statements
just wait 1 second, sorry.
and understanding, trying to understand.
So what's interesting is this guy doesn't have a hard background in philosophy, or doesn't even care, basically. But yet
Yeah,
he's got
like,
millions of people watching him about philosophy.
yeah, what a weird thing to say. Like, like at this time there wasn't that many people watching the Crucible, right? But what's weird still is that the title of the debate literally says, "Is naturalism / materialism coherent?" So it's literally a philosophical topic, right? And it's rife with, like definitions, like right there in the title of the debate. So the fact that he just said, "Oh, well, I'm not really here to debate philosophy." Well, you're here to debate naturalism. So how are you going to avoid philosophy, right? Like just exactly what was he going to bring to the, debate, right? It's really just an odd thing to say. And of course, it's 19 minutes into the debate, right? I mean, they should have called the whole thing off at this point.
Well, I mean, maybe sometimes they just need filler content. Just bring a random idiot, that doesn't really know anything off the internet. Make content out of them like we know people do us.
Yeah.
Yeah, is naturalism coherent? Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't
Well,
really know about
but what's
philosophy.
special about this one is that Wilson went out of his way to be extra nice and cozy with this guy. Like, oh, I like this guy. He's very nice.
Yep. That was the first indicator. How often does he ever admit he likes someone? No, you got to keep him entertained, right? Bread and circuses.
Yeah, I actually did watch this debate a little bit, but like halfway and like some other stuff. Yeah, the Staxian guy doesn't
Well,
really
compare that to what they say now, where they say that like liberalism is literally like death, and they're trying to kill us all, and blah 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 blah. You know what I mean? So it's like, what a change in a very short amount of time in rhetoric,
Yeah.
But yet they still debate these guys like they're friends with them and have a beer with them afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Also I want to say that, when you get deep into like so-called science, they don't actually have a cogent definition of the physical, like quantum physics. The definition of physical kind of breaks down on the quantum level. For example, Federico Fagin, he's an idealist or a panpsychist. He believes that mind is in the quantum field. So mind is like universal to Federico Fagin. I was talking about him a little bit. Like he thinks the vibrational quantum field have a degree of consciousness. And I wanted to say that the physical, like, there's no cogent way to frame the physical at all, because we don't really have a definition of the physical since we abandoned contact mechanics with Newton. So the question, like, is this the brain? Is this the table? Is it physical? Doesn't make sense since we don't really have a cogent definition of physical. They're just different parts of the world that we try to make sense of, But the thing is that the mind or the experience, cannot really be explained by physical quantitative facts. If you experience red, like like there's a experience, like in my other video I talk about, about Mary's thought room experience. Like Mary is inside a room that's monochrome, black and white. She learns all the neurochemical facts about the color experience red. She reads about it endlessly, but when she finally leaves that room and sees red for the first time, she gains knowledge of red that goes beyond the mere brute physical facts, the mechanism, I'm trying to say. And, the thing is, when you go down into quantum physics too, it's all probabilities and it's all like vibrational quantum fields. So it's not really like, pure mechanism, because you're dealing with like stuff like, that kind of breaks down your basic mechanistic understanding, So I don't think this guy has a strong scientific background either, because first you have to define what is physical, that's kind of hard to do also. Like, what is physical? But the thing is the mind, the experience, like how does it relate to the external world? It's a very tough question.
I think that's what the movie. I think that's what the movie Inception was trying to bring to the masses. A lot of people just see that movie as about dreams, but when you really go and study that movie, boy, it even made me re-examine what some of my dreams mean. So, because I can tell you, in some of the dreams that I've been put into,
I'll give you guys an
sounds right.
Let me give you an example. I had a dream the other day, and I had a lot of weird dreams the past few days. Probably a little sick or something, but so let me take you guys this one. So I went to like Hawaii or something, and then like somebody I know, kind of like not too well, was there, and they're like, oh, this is their property, we didn't know, and then it's like this giant cliff that's like literally like 100 stories up, so like they thought they got beachfront property, and it was, but like it's like literally like 1,000 feet down to the beach, you know what I'm saying, like straight down. And this is very like extremely vivid, by the way, like and you can literally see like in both directions, and anyways, then they go back and say like, oh, here's our little property, and you can stay the night. And so I went in the house, and it's like it's like a normal house, like it's very like realistic, and then I was kind of getting weirded out, and then they're like, oh, you can sleep out here on this like kind of like a porch deck thing, you know what I mean? And then when I went out there, I saw this like well, it looked like a monkey human hybrid thing. And then there was like a spider that jumped on it and started like cutting its head off. And then the person's like over there like just rearranging all his guns and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is very uncomfortable. So I don't know. So if someone wants to interpret that dream, tell me what that means.
Monkey human hybrid thing. Was it standing in a particular stance? Was it like?
Well, it was on top of a shed, and then the spider thing was like very like hairy and thorny and like very fast moving, like something out of a nightmare, basically, literally. So yeah, it's pretty intense. And just the fact that nobody else was reacting really freaked me out, because they were like, oh, you can still stay here. I was like, no. I'm gonna like drive 50 miles away from this place and sleep there.
A beautiful scene, but with scary aesthetic. I mean, that could be many things. I mean, a lot of my dreams, most of my dreams that were nightmares, I mean, the theme always usually centered around a personal message. It was never, you're just thrown into randomness and you're just randomly watching events happening. So, I mean, the monkey can represent many things. The spider is definitely something violent, or what most spiders represent, a silent assassin in the corner. So, I mean, it could mean a lot of things. It could be a personal thing in your own life with your own family. It could be, you have to be careful when you try to interpret your own dreams. I don't try to push off my dreams when I have them, but when you're constantly having end of the world dreams where you're watching the world break open and lava pour out of the ground and, the sun turn into, black sackcloth and, all this other horrible end of the world stuff, you get to the point where you're just like, okay, it's there. But I mean, dreams are very strange. I haven't had a good dream in a very, very, very long time. So, I mean, is it a product of what I've consumed, or, is it God who just sends you messages every once in a while to warn you? I mean, it could be a lot of things. I mean,
let me also say something. So I would agree with Jim Bob that the empirical sciences currently doesn't know like how informational content magically arises from physical systems, or whether it, like how it relates to it ontologically. That's more of a question for philosophy. So, let me tell you something interesting. Schrödinger, one of the best quantum physicists, he was an idealist. He thought that the mind was the basis of reality, like pure awareness. Or you have Federico Fagini, who was like Fagini. He's like one of the best creators of the computer, Federico Fagini. Yeah, no, I know that's a weird name, because it's an Italian name. It's kind of funny, but yeah, he argues that the mind is, more special and stuff. But yeah, basically, Jim Bob is right about the knowledge and information not being fully explicable by reference to the physical constituents of parts. So I agree with him there so far. So that's all. That's all I want to add.
Right, he's pretty much a dualist. So he agrees with Staxium's that the physical matter is dead. Right, like it has nothing.
the wood is dead.
Yeah, so that's a key distinction as well. He thinks obviously he thinks that knowledge is coming from the mind of God. So
Well, where do you get dualism from? Because that's very interesting. Like, I've never heard anybody call Jim Bob a dualist. So,
well, it's like
what do you mean by that?
he explained it through Descartes, right? This is the example he used, right?
So you're saying Jim Bob agrees with the dualism? And just reiterate that. Well, I want to make sure I understand that position, so I can.
Well, he agrees with dualism in the sense that he doesn't think that mind just comes from matter, right? He thinks it's separate, right? So he doesn't think that mind exists in the physical world either, right? So this is the thing, is that he thinks mind exists, through the mind of God, through intelligent beings that have rational minds, right? Like humans.
So is that what Morpheus was getting at with Neo when he woke up and he busted his mouth in the Matrix? The mind, the body can't live without the mind.
Yeah. Like, for example, Jim Bob does not believe that animals have free will, right? I'm
right.
Sure, right. So
I lean more towards a kind of a hybrid.
I would say programmed.
Panpsychism and idealism. Panpsychism and idealism. I think mind is, pervasive, and it increases in degrees. But I have to look into Federico Fagini, because I think his idea of the quantum vibrational fields has some truth to it also, basically. So mind is more ubiquitous in my view, but it matters and changes in degrees, basically. That's kind of like David Scribner also, basically.
Well, you see, I think that's another lie that they're pushing a lot of the media, where they want to sit here and make it seem like the brain is really just somewhat maybe advanced organism. But, in reality, we all know that the mind is definitely a lot more on the surface level than, even in some of the studies that they've released. I mean, I've been in a few sleep studies because of my sleep paralysis and stuff. And I mean, they told me that a lot of my scans weren't normal. They didn't really give me a diagnosis. I don't have no pressure on the brain. I don't have no tumors, but yet they can't sit here and diagnose, maybe you get too worked up about your anxiety. That does not explain the demonic fucking things that happen to me when I have these attacks. So the mind is definitely a lot more powerful than and that's why they put chemicals in your stuff to fucking turn off your frequencies. But,
So, but what you described in dualism, isn't that like a Kabbalistic thing? Sorry to interrupt you, Avian.
Well, Bernardo Castrap has some interesting things to say about that. Also, he actually talks about how psychedelics actually deactivate more parts of your brain than it actually makes it more active. So, in a way, that when you take psychedelics, you're kind of like exposed to the universal mind and without any filtration or
Right.
something.
Right, and
Like
that's
well,
what
oh,
that's
sorry,
what
go ahead.
Christians believe in, right? They believe in a universal mind type of concept, right? Because it's this sort of universal mind that God used to create the world, right? God created the world through Jesus, right? So to speak, right? So there's in my last discussion with Jim Bob, right, he outlined that there's primary and secondary causes, right? I bluntly asked him, does God control everything in the universe? Right? He said, well, there's primary and secondary causes, right? I think this spells out dualism.
Yeah, for
Well,
sure.
isn't that Kabbalistic though? I mean, like straight out of Kabbalah, essentially.
I think it's related. Somewhat to Maimonides, right? Because Maimonides was kind of like a dualist in that sense. He believed in a
also,
universal mind.
can I add something? I think
And
Kabbalah was
that
written around 1200 AD, and they just took a lot of stuff from the Greeks and from the Hebrew, their own tradition, and just mixed it together. So, I don't like the Kabbalah, but I do like the ancient Greeks more, what I mean? Like, but the Kabbalah does have a lot of creepy stuff, but they just take a bunch of stuff haphazardly and mixed it together around 1200 AD. I think so.
Well,
and the Church of Satan kind of does that too. In some places, they like pushing the whole. We know that Satan's not on the same level as God, but we have exalted him on the same level as God because he is the light bearer who told us that God was the asshole. So,
Yeah,
just saying,
that's what they
and
do. They just misappropriate stuff, or they appropriate a lot of stuff, and then they like mix it together for their own worldview. So yeah, that's what they do. Yeah.
lots of dualism, lots of black and white, lots of red and blue.
Yeah. What were you trying to say, Neurojack? Sorry for interrupting you. You're trying to say something, right?
I forgot honestly. I mean, I think I'm just trying to get to the point of like, well, you know, I don't know. I think it's very interesting. It's like the way they're arguing is like I agree with. I mean, honestly, I
Maybe
agree
they're
with.
trying to initiate them. Maybe they're trying to initiate them. Maybe
Well,
they're trying to like Rick Grimes. They got to ask him the right questions before he can join the group.
well. I mean, we can't get into that right now, but I mean, we could, but I don't think we probably shouldn't. But yeah, but I think that what's interesting though is like kind of what.
Have you? What we first talked about was that what your metaphysics are kind of determines how you perceive the world and how you act in the world, right?
We're losing you.
No, I was saying like whatever your metaphysics are, kind of determines your.
Yes, that's right. Metaphysics determine your metaphysical presumptions determine how you interpret empirical findings, and that's the problem with stuff like modern synthesis. They have a radical empiricism where they think that they can figure out all of the metaphysical presumptions by getting more and more data, but that's not how it works, because there are certain unfalsifiable assumptions that undergird or like inform how you interpret and like frame things. The framing depends on your philosophical assumptions. You see what I'm saying? So, that's why a lot of stuff in empirical science feels circular. You know what I mean? Like I was talking about near the beginning. But yeah, that's the thing. There are like that's the problem with positivism. Positivism or logical positivism. Quinn wrote a very good essay refuting logical positivism a long time ago. But yeah, going to that stuff will be kind of tedious and long. But yeah, I'm not a positivist. Yeah, logical positivist.
Well, I mean, I'm not really hip to what that means, other than being in the constant idea that everything is going to get better, or things will get worse before they get better. I mean, I'm not one of them people either.
Well, I can I can define it a little bit. Like I'll just keep it simple because this is a philosophy thing, and I have a lot of notes. But basically, logical positivism comes down to verification principle. that statements are meaningful only if they can be verified through direct observation or logical
Right.
proof. However, a key flaw in this approach is that the verification principle itself cannot meet its own criteria for verification, making it
Right.
self-refuting. The verification principle is a meta-statement about how meaning is determined, and testing or proving it would require applying its own criteria to itself. Attempting to justify the verification principle results in circular reasoning. Empirical evidence or logical proof cannot validate a rule that determines what qualifies as evidence or proof. And that was from something I wrote a while back. But yeah, that's kind of like the problem, or at least the intro to the problem of logical positivism. And most materialists, like this man Staxians, they tend to be positivists without knowing it. So, and I just want to mention that that's what logical positivism refers to. And as a consequence, they don't seem to realize that they're dismissing the validity of mind or other stuff like that. The question about God is not something that can be answered with empirical science. And you can, that's the thing. And this is more of a philosophy or theological kind of thing, philosophy. But yeah, that's why I say philosophy is more important than empirical science. Because with philosophy, it really informs and frames how you view things. And that's the thing. The materialist worldview or physicalist worldview is unfalsifiable. Also, is what I'm saying.
Well,
So,
think about it. Think about it like this. Like, I'm not going to allege that this whole debate is propaganda. I think it's the case, but what would be the purpose of building so much propaganda for 1,000 years or 2,000 years or 3,000 years about philosophy in order to get people to operate their mind in a certain operating system? You know what I'm saying?
yeah, I know what you're saying. I think they promoted positivism and they promoted radical empiricism because they wanted more people to fit into the system. Because this system is materialistic at the end of the day. It's only concerned with the kind of
Yep.
things that Lord
Yep.
talks about. So they don't want people to have a sense of the sacred anymore. You know what I mean? That's the main thing. They want people to see everything as pinballs hitting each other endlessly, and then you have emergent properties from the pinball. That's the way I interpret it. I think that's why they promote it.
They want you to be like Forrest Gump playing ping pong with his ping pong paddle.
That's fucking right. While they shoot you in the ass, you won't get a Presidential Medal of Honor for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Well, I can keep playing this, or if people are tired, I can end the stream now. It depends. Like, I can keep going. Like a vote. Like, what do people want? To continue this some other time, or to continue? What is people's preference here?
I mean, I just joined because y'all were going. Whatever y'all want to do, I'm fine.
I'm ambivalent as well. I mean, I think if you got numbers up, you might as well get them watch hours so we can all grift like Andrew Wilson. I mean, some of us might fall down, but some of us might make it at the end. You know what I mean? So.
Well, I say find who's real and keep them close, like a card of decks to your chest. Not dicks, decks. Cards. Just don't bring in Kevin. Don't bring in.
Great anal allergy. I mean,
there you go.
Analogy. Excuse me, sorry.
Just don't bring in Kevin Spacey, okay? He might be in someone's basement.
Well,
he might drag you into his basement.
I think that we covered a lot of ground. This is a long thing, so we listened to the opening statement. So I think that's good enough. I think people should, if you want to, you can give closing remarks. Or,
so who's going live next to keep the audience entertained so we can have the audience
let me recommend TML's channel too, because he's going live at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, around 8 o'clock to 7:30 to 8 o'clock he's going live. So
who wants to host the next party?
TML is hosting the next party at 7:30.
I mean between now and then. So that
That's
way the
up to you,
audience is
Neuro,
ready
if you want to open one up. I think you're the only other one here. That...
Longer, so I'm just saying I don't know how many people are watching. How many people you got?
So I'm gonna recommend Lord's channel also on the banner. First, I have to course, the right.
Oh, I wouldn't recommend my Goyim channel. It's the worst. It's the worst goy slop out there.
Yes, I recommend TML's channel for more stuff on like Elo and the dangers of the technique that's growing. It's a very good channel. And now I'm going to recommend also Lord's channel, which has some interesting content.
I appreciate it. It's all from the heart. It's all a psyop.
Yeah, that's right. Let me see here. So I will have to write that. So I'll put it on the chat. So
How many,
We like to
How
call
many people
ourselves
you
the
got watching?
anti-psyop unit. There we go.
I like it. How many people you got watching, David?
I got 5 people watching. 5 people.
Oh my God, we're getting the big leagues now, guys.
Not enough feds watching. We need more feds.
Yeah, feds, please send your bots and all your peoples in here. I think Browns Boy should start a channel so we can just start we all need to like work as a team and keep all the audience sloshing around. The the OTW and stuff is all it gets the numbers, but I don't know. It's a little bit brain. I tried to watch that yesterday. It was kind of brain damaging. I was like, I couldn't really.
That's right. Give everyone fucking whiplash.
You know what I noticed about that too is like, I can't expect to like every single show every single time, but I am thankful for the presentations that you guys put on, and the space that you guys do share. So I appreciate you guys for that.
And Brown's Boy, no, I'm not being facetious. I do appreciate you because even though I don't get along with you very well, you are very consistent and you do actually, show a lot of dedication to what is being done here. So I just want to tell you, I do appreciate that because that is very.
That's something I wanted to say. Like the small group of people who actually have their heart in it the way that we do. We shouldn't. If we have a bad day where we want to spit at each other, sure, say some words, but we're in this shit together, y'all. We're not the enemies. If your heart's really in it, we're not the enemies.
We're all in Arkham's Asylum together at this point.
That's right. I mean, what happened? Did your balls drop off? Well, now they cut them off or chemically castrate you, but yeah. Love y'all. Just, let's all be at peace.
Yes, and that's a great way to end the show. I appreciate everyone who watches, anyone on this stream, anyone on this space. I appreciate this space too. Thank you for watching the stream. I'm going to end it now in like 15 seconds. So
good. Do it. Do it. Now, I appreciate you, Avian. I'm glad that you've come around your breath of fresh air.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, and that's the end of the stream.
Peace.
Peace.
important difference. It is conceivable that our environmental problems, for example, may someday be settled through a rational, comprehensive plan. But if this happens, it will be only because it is in the long-term interest of the system to solve these problems. But it is not in the interest of the system to preserve freedom or small group autonomy. On the contrary, it is in the interest of the system to bring human behavior under control to the greatest extent possible. Thus, while practical considerations may eventually force the system to take rational, prudent approach to environmental problems, equally practical considerations will force the system to regulate human behavior ever more closely, preferably by indirect means that will disguise the encroachment on freedom. This isn't just our opinion. Eminent social scientists, for example James Q. Wilson, have stressed the importance of socializing people more effectively. Revolution is easier than reform. We hope we've convinced the reader that the system cannot be reformed in such a way as to reconcile freedom with technology. The only way out is to dispense with the industrial technological system altogether. This implies revolution, not necessarily an armed uprising, but certainly a radical and fundamental change in the nature of society. People tend to assume that because revolution involves a much greater change than reform does, it is more difficult to bring about than reform is. Actually, under certain circumstances, revolution is much easier than reform. The reason is that a revolutionary movement can inspire an intensity of commitment that a reform movement cannot inspire. A reform movement merely offers to solve a particular social problem. A revolutionary movement offers to solve all problems at one stroke and create a whole new world. It provides the kind of ideal for which people will take great risks and make great sacrifices. For this reason, it would be much easier to overthrow the whole technological system than to put effective permanent restraints on the development or application of any one segment of technology, such as genetic engineering, for example. Not many people will devote themselves with a single-minded passion to imposing and maintaining restraints on genetic engineering, but under suitable conditions, large numbers of people may devote themselves passionately to a revolution against the industrial technological system. As we noted in paragraph 132, reformers seeking to limit certain aspects of technology would be working to avoid a negative outcome, but revolutionaries work to gain a powerful reward, fulfillment of their revolutionary vision, and therefore work harder and more persistently than reformers do. Reform is always restrained by the fear of painful consequences if change goes too far. But once a revolutionary fever has taken hold of a society, people are willing to undergo unlimited hardships for the sake of their revolution. This was clearly shown in the French and Russian revolutions. It may be in such cases only a minority of the population is really committed to the revolution, but this minority is sufficiently large and active so that it becomes the dominant force in society. We will have more to say about a revolution in paragraphs 180 through 205. Control of human behavior. Since the beginning of civilization, organized societies have had to put pressures on human beings for the sake of the functioning of the social organism. The kinds of pressures vary greatly from one society to another. Some of the pressures are physical, poor diet, excessive labor, environmental pollution, and some are psychological, noise, crowding, forcing human behavior into the mold that society requires. In the past, human nature has been approximately constant, or at any rate has varied only within certain bounds. Consequently, societies have been able to push people only up to certain limits. When the limit of human endurance has passed, things start going wrong. Rebellion, or crime, or corruption, or evasion of work, or depression, and some other mental problems, or an elevated death rate, or a declining birth rate, or something else, so that either the society breaks down, or its functioning becomes too inefficient, and it is quickly or gradually, through conquest, attrition, or evolution, replaced by some more efficient form of society. Thus, human nature has in the past put certain limits on the development of societies. People could be pushed only so far and no farther. But today, this may be changing because modern technology is developing ways of modifying human beings. Imagine a society that subjects people to conditions that make them terribly unhappy, then gives them drugs to take away their unhappiness. Science fiction? It's already happening to some extent in our own society. It is well known that the rate of clinical depression has been greatly increasing in recent decades. We believe that this is due to disruption of the power process, as explained in paragraphs 59 through 76. But even if we are wrong, the increasing rate of depression is certainly the result of some conditions that exist in today's society. Instead of removing the conditions that make people depressed, modern society gives them antidepressant drugs. In effect, antidepressants are a means of modifying an individual's internal state in such a way as to enable him to tolerate social conditions that he would otherwise find intolerable. Yes, we know that depression is often of purely genetic origin. We are referring here to the cases in which environment plays the predominant role. Drugs that affect the mind are only one example of the new methods of controlling human behavior that modern society is developing. Let us look at some of the other methods. To start, there are techniques of surveillance. Hidden video cameras are now used in most stores, and in many other places, computers are used to collect and process vast amounts of information about individuals. Information so obtained greatly increases the effectiveness of physical coercion, in other words, law enforcement. Then there are methods of propaganda for which the mass communication media provide effective vehicles. Efficient techniques have been developed for winning elections, selling products, influencing public opinion. The entertainment industry serves as an important psychological tool of the system, possibly even when it is dishing out large amounts of sex and violence. Entertainment provides modern man with an essential means of escape. While absorbed in television, videos, etc., he can forget stress, anxiety, frustration, dissatisfaction. Many primitive peoples, when they don't have work to do, are quite content to sit for hours at a time doing nothing at all because they are at peace with themselves and their world. But most modern people must be constantly occupied or entertained, otherwise they get bored. In other words, they get fidgety, uneasy, irritable. Other techniques strike deeper than the foregoing. Education is no longer a simple affair of paddling a kid's behind when he doesn't know his lessons and patting him on the head when he does know them. It is becoming a scientific technique for controlling the child's development. Sylvan Learning Centers, for example, have had great success in motivating children to study, and psychological techniques are also used with more or less success in many conventional schools. Parenting techniques that are taught to parents are designed to make children accept fundamental values of the system and behave in ways that the system finds desirable. Mental health programs, intervention techniques, psychotherapy, and so forth are ostensibly designed to benefit individuals, but in practice, they usually serve as methods for inducing individuals to think and behave as the system requires. There is no contradiction here. An individual whose attitudes or behavior bring him into conflict with the system is up against a force that is too powerful for him to conquer or escape from. Hence, he is likely to suffer from stress, frustration, defeat. His path will be much easier if he thinks and behaves as the system requires. In that sense, the system is acting for the benefit of the individual when it brainwashes him into conformity. Child abuse, in its gross and obvious forms, is disapproved in most, if not all, cultures. Tormenting a child for trivial reasons, or no reason at all, is something that appalls almost everyone. But many psychologists interpret the concept of abuse much more broadly. Is spanking, when used as a part of rational, consistent system of discipline, a form of abuse? The question will ultimately be decided by whether or not spanking tends to produce behavior that makes a person fit in well with the existing system of society. In practice, the word abuse tends to be interpreted to include any method of child rearing that produces behavior inconvenient for the system. Thus, when they go beyond the prevention of obvious senseless cruelty, programs for preventing child abuse are directed toward the control of human behavior on behalf of the system. Presumably, research will continue to increase the effectiveness of psychological techniques for controlling human behavior, but we think it is unlikely that psychological techniques alone will be sufficient to adjust human beings to the kind of society that technology is creating. Biological methods probably will have to be used. We have already mentioned the use of drugs in this connection. Neurology may provide other avenues for modifying the human mind. Genetic engineering of human beings is already beginning to occur in the form of gene therapy, and there is no reason to assume that such methods will not eventually be used to modify those aspects of the body that affect mental functioning. As we mentioned in paragraph 134, industrial society seems likely to be entering a period of severe stress, due in part to the problems of human behavior and in part to economic and environmental problems. And a considerable proportion of the system's economic and environmental problems result from the way human beings behave. Alienation, low self-esteem, depression, hostility, rebellion, children who won't study, youth gangs, illegal drug use, rape, child abuse, other crimes, unsafe sex, teen pregnancy, population growth, political corruption, race hatred, ethnic rivalry, bitter ideological conflict, for example, pro-choice versus pro-life, political extremism, terrorism, sabotage, anti-government groups, hate groups. All these threaten the very survival of the system. The system will therefore be forced to use every practical means of controlling human behavior. The social disruption that we see today is certainly not the result of mere chance. It can only be a result of the conditions of life that the system imposes on people. We have argued that the most important of these conditions is disruption of the power process. If the system succeeds in imposing sufficient control over human behavior to assure its own survival, a new watershed in human history will have been passed. Whereas formerly the limits of human endurance have imposed limits on the development of societies, as we explain in paragraphs 143 and 144, industrial technological society will be able to pass those limits by modifying human beings, whether by psychological methods or biological methods or both. In the future, social systems will not be adjusted to suit the needs of human beings. Instead, human beings will be adjusted to suit the needs of the system. Generally speaking, technological control over human behavior will probably not be introduced with a totalitarian intention or even through a conscious desire to restrict human freedom. Each new step in the assertion of control over the human mind will be taken as a rational response to a problem that faces society, such as curing alcoholism, reducing the crime rate, or inducing young people to study science and engineering. In many cases, there will be a humanitarian justification. For example, when a psychiatrist prescribes an antidepressant for a depressed patient, he is clearly doing that individual a favor. It would be inhumane to withhold the drug from someone who needs it. When parents send their children to Sylvan Learning Centers to have them manipulated into becoming enthusiastic about their studies, they do so from concern for their children's welfare. It may be that some of these parents wish that one didn't have to have specialized training to get a job, and that their kid didn't have to be brainwashed into becoming a computer nerd. But what can they do? They can't change society, and their child may be unemployable if he doesn't have certain skills, so they send him to Sylvan. Thus, control over human behavior will be introduced not by a calculated decision of the authorities, but through a process of social evolution, rapid evolution, however. The process will be impossible to resist because each advance considered by itself will appear to be beneficial, or at least the evil involved in making the advance will appear to be beneficial. Or, at least the evil involved in making the advance will seem to be less than that which would result from not making it. Propaganda, for example, is used for many good purposes, such as discouraging child abuse or race hatred. Sex education is obviously useful, yet the effect of sex education, to the extent that it is successful, is to take the shaping of sexual attitudes away from the family and put it in the hands of the state as represented by the public school system. Suppose a biological trait is discovered that increases the likelihood that a child will grow up to be a criminal, and suppose some sort of gene therapy can remove this trait. Of course, most parents whose children possess the trait will have them undergo the therapy. It would be inhumane to do otherwise, since the child would probably have a miserable life if he grew up to be a criminal. But many or most primitive societies have a low crime rate in comparison with that of our society, even though they have neither high-tech methods of child rearing nor harsh systems of punishment. Since there is no reason to suppose that more modern men than primitive men have innate predatory tendencies, the high crime rate of our society must be due to the pressures that modern conditions put on people, to which many cannot or will not adjust. Thus, a treatment designed to remove potential criminal tendencies is at least in part a way of re-engineering people so that they suit the requirements of the system. Our society tends to regard as a sickness any mode of thought or behavior that is inconvenient for the system. And this is plausible because when an individual doesn't fit into the system, it causes pain to the individual as well as problems for the system. Thus, the manipulation of an individual to adjust him to the system is seen as a cure for a sickness and therefore as good. In paragraph 127, we pointed out that if the use of a new item of technology is initially optional, it does not necessarily remain optional because the new technology tends to change society in such a way that it becomes difficult or impossible for an individual to function without using that technology. This applies also to the technology of human behavior. In a world in which most children are put through a program to make them enthusiastic about studying, a parent will almost always be forced to put his kid through such a program, because if he does not, then the kid will grow up to be, comparatively speaking, an ignoramus and therefore unemployable. Or suppose a biological treatment is discovered that, without undesirable side effects, will greatly reduce the psychological stress from which so many people suffer in our society. If large numbers of people choose to undergo the treatment, so that it will be impossible for the system to increase the stress-producing pressures. In fact, something like this seems to have happened already with one of our society's most important psychological tools for enabling people to reduce, or at least temporarily escape from stress, namely mass entertainment. Our use of mass entertainment is optional. No law requires us to watch television, listen to the radio, read magazines. Yet mass entertainment is a means of escape and stress reduction on which most of us have become dependent. Everyone complains about the trashiness of television, but almost everyone watches it. A few have kicked the TV habit, but it would be a rare person who could get along today without any form of mass entertainment. Yet until quite recently in human history, most people got along very nicely with no other entertainment than that which each local community created for itself. Without the entertainment industry, the system probably would not have been able to get away with putting as much stress-producing pressure on us as it does. Assuming the industrial society survives, it is likely that technology will eventually acquire something approaching a complete control over human behavior. It has been established beyond any rational doubt that human thought and behavior have a largely biological basis. As experimenters have demonstrated, feelings such as hunger, pleasure, anger, and fear can be turned on and off by electrical stimulation of appropriate parts of the brain. Memories can be destroyed by damaging parts of the brain, or they can be brought to the surface by electrical stimulation. Hallucinations can be induced or moods changed by drugs. There may or may not be an immaterial human soul, but if there is one, it is clearly less powerful than the biological mechanisms of human behavior. For if that were not the case, then researchers would not be able to so easily manipulate human feelings and behavior with drugs and electrical currents. It presumably would be impractical for all people to have electrodes inserted into their heads so that they could be controlled by the authorities. But the fact that human thoughts and feelings are so open to biological intervention shows that the problem of controlling human behavior is mainly a technical problem, a problem of neurons, hormones, and complex molecules, the kind of problem that is accessible to scientific attack. Given the outstanding record of our society in solving technical problems, it is overwhelmingly probable that great advances will be made in the control of human behavior. Will public resistance prevent the introduction of technological control of human behavior? It certainly would if an attempt were made to introduce such control all at once, but since technological control will be introduced through a long sequence of small advances, there will be no rational and effective public resistance. To those who think all this sounds like science fiction, we point out that yesterday's science fiction is today's fact. The Industrial Revolution has radically altered man's environment and way of life, and it is only to be expected that as technology is increasingly applied to the human body and mind, man himself will be altered as radically as his environment and way of life have been. Human race at a crossroads. But we have gotten ahead of our story. It is one thing to develop in the laboratory a series of psychological or biological techniques for manipulating human behavior, and quite another to integrate these techniques into a functioning social system. The latter problem is the more difficult of the two. For example, while the techniques of educational psychology doubtless work quite well in the lab schools where they were developed, it is not necessarily easy to apply them effectively throughout our educational system. We all know what many of our schools are like. The teachers are too busy taking knives and guns away from the kids to subject them to the latest techniques for making them into computer nerds. Thus, in spite of all its technical advances relating to human behavior, the system to date has not been impressively successful in controlling human beings. The people whose behavior is fairly well under the control of the system are those of the type that might be called bourgeois. But there are growing numbers of people who in one way or another are rebels against the system. Welfare leeches, youth gangs, cultists, Satanists, Nazis, radical environmentalists, militiamen, etc. The system is currently engaged in a desperate struggle to overcome certain problems that threaten its survival, among which the problems of human behavior are the most important. If the system succeeds in acquiring sufficient control over human behavior quickly enough, it will probably survive. Otherwise, it will break down. We think the issue will most likely be resolved in the next several decades, say 40 to 100 years. Suppose the system survives the crisis of the next several decades. By that time, it will have to have solved, or at least brought under control, the principal problems that confront it, in particular that of socializing human beings. That is, making people sufficiently docile so that their behavior no longer threatens the system. That being accomplished, it does not appear that there would be any further obstacle to the development of technology, and it would presumably advance towards its logical conclusion, which is complete control over everything on Earth, including human beings and all other important organisms. The system may become a unitary monolithic organization, or it may be more or less fragmented and consist of a number of organizations coexisting in a relationship that includes elements of both cooperation and competition, just as today the government, the corporations, and other large organizations both cooperate and compete with one another. Human freedom will mostly have vanished because individuals and small groups will be impotent vis-a-vis large organizations armed with super technology and an arsenal of advanced psychological and biological tools for manipulating human beings, besides instruments of surveillance and physical coercion. Only a small number of people will have any real power, and even these probably will have only very limited freedom, because their behavior too will be regulated. Just as today, our politicians and corporation executives can retain their positions of power only as long as their behavior remains within fairly narrow limits. Don't imagine that the systems will stop developing further techniques for controlling human beings and nature once the crisis of the next few decades is over and increasing control is no longer necessary for the system's survival. On the contrary, once the hard times are over, the system will increase its control over people and nature more rapidly because it will no longer be hampered by difficulties of the kind that it is currently experiencing. Survival is not the principal motive for extending control. As we explained in paragraphs 87 through 90, technicians and scientists carry on their work largely as a surrogate activity. That is, they satisfy their need for power by solving technical problems. They will continue to do this with unabated enthusiasm, and among the most interesting and challenging problems for them to solve will be those of understanding the human body and mind and intervening in their development, for the good of humanity, of course. But suppose, on the other hand, that the stresses of the coming decades prove to be too much for the system. If the system breaks down, there may be a period of chaos, a time of troubles such as those that history has recorded at various epochs in the past. It is impossible to predict what would emerge from such a time of troubles, but at any rate, the human race would be given a new chance. The greatest danger is that the industrial society may begin to reconstitute itself within the first few years after the breakdown. Certainly, there will be many people, power-hungry types especially, who will be anxious to get the factories running again. Therefore, two tasks confront those who hate the servitude to which the industrial system is reducing the human race. First, we must work to heighten the social stresses within the system so as to increase the likelihood that it will break down or be weakened sufficiently so that a revolution against it becomes possible. Second, it is necessary to develop and propagate an ideology that opposes technology and the industrial society if and when the system becomes sufficiently weakened. And such an ideology will help to assure that if and when industrial society breaks down, its remnants will be smashed beyond repair so that the system cannot be reconstituted. The factories should be destroyed, technical books burned, etc. Human suffering. The industrial system will not break down purely as a result of revolutionary action. It will not be vulnerable to revolutionary attack unless its own internal problems of development lead it into very serious difficulties. So if the system breaks down, it will do so either spontaneously or through a process that is in part spontaneous, but helped along by revolutionaries. If the breakdown is sudden, many people will die, since the world's population has become so overgrown that it cannot even feed itself any longer without advanced technology. Even if the breakdown is gradual enough so that the reduction of the population can occur more through lowering of the birth rate than through elevations of the death rate, the process of deindustrialization probably will be very chaotic and involve much suffering. It is naive to think it likely that technology can be phased out in a smooth, managed, orderly way, especially since the technophiles will fight stubbornly at every step. Is it therefore cruel to work for the breakdown of the system? Maybe, but maybe not. In the first place, revolutionaries will not be able to break the system down unless it is already in enough trouble so that there will be a good chance of its eventually breaking down by itself anyway. And the bigger the system grows, the more disastrous the consequences of its breakdown will be. So it may be that revolutionaries, by hastening the onset of the breakdown, will be reducing the extent of the disaster. In the second place, one has to balance struggle and death against the loss of freedom and dignity. To many of us, freedom and dignity are more important than a long life or avoidance of physical pain. Besides, we all have to die sometime, and it may be better to die fighting for survival for a cause than to live a long but empty and purposeless life. In the third place, it is not certain that the survival of the system will lead to less suffering than the breakdown of the system would. The system has already caused and is continuing to cause immense suffering all over the world. Ancient cultures that for hundreds of years gave people a satisfactory relationship with each other and with their environment have been shattered by contact with the industrial society, and the result has been a whole catalog of economic, environmental, social, and psychological problems. One of the effects of the intrusion of industrial society has been that over much of the world, traditional controls on population have been thrown out of balance.
Hence the population explosion with all that implies.
Then there is the psychological suffering that is widespread throughout the supposedly fortunate countries of the West. No one knows what will happen as a result of ozone depletion, the greenhouse effect, and other environmental problems that cannot yet be foreseen. And, as nuclear proliferation has shown, new technology cannot be kept out of the hands of dictators and the irresponsible third world nations. Would you like to speculate about what Iraq or North Korea will do with genetic engineering? Oh, say the technophiles, science is going to fix all that. We will conquer famine, eliminate psychological suffering, and make everybody healthy and happy. Yeah, sure. That's what they said 200 years ago. The Industrial Revolution was supposed to eliminate poverty, make everybody happy, etc. The actual result has been quite different. The technophiles are hopelessly naive or self-deceiving in their understanding of social problems. They are unaware or choose to ignore the fact that when large changes, even seemingly beneficial ones, are introduced into society, they lead to a long consequence of other changes, most of which are impossible to predict. The result is disruption of the society. So it is very probable that in their attempts to end poverty and disease, engineer docile, happy personalities, and so forth, the technophiles will create social systems that are terribly troubled, even more so than the present ones. For example, scientists boast that they will end famine by creating new genetically engineered food plants. But this will allow the human population to keep expanding indefinitely, and it is well known that crowding leads to increased stress and aggression. This is merely one example of the predictable problems that will arise. We emphasize that, as past experience has shown, technical progress will lead to other new problems that cannot be predicted in advance. In fact, ever since the Industrial Revolution, technology has been creating new problems for society far more rapidly than it has been solving old ones. Thus, it will take a long and difficult period of trial and error for the technophiles to work the bugs out of their brave new world, if they ever do. In the meantime, there will be great suffering. So it is not at all clear that the survival of industrial society would involve less suffering than the breakdown of that society would. Technology has gotten the human race into a fix from which there is not likely to be any escape. The future. But suppose now that industrial society does survive the next several decades, and that the bugs do eventually get worked out of the system so that it functions smoothly. What kind of system will it be? We will consider several possibilities. First, let us postulate that the computer scientists succeed in developing intelligent machines that can do all things better than human beings can do them. In that case, presumably, all work will be done by vast, highly organized systems of machines, and no human effort will be necessary. Either of two cases might occur. The machines might be permitted to make all of their own decisions without human oversight, or else human control over the machines might be retained. If the machines are permitted to make all their own decisions, we can't make any conjectures as to the results, because it is impossible to guess how such machines might behave. We only point out that the fate of the human race would be at the mercy of the machines. It might be argued that the human race would never be foolish enough to hand over all power to the machines, but we are suggesting neither that the human race would voluntarily turn power over to the machines, nor that the machines would willfully seize power. What we do suggest is that the human race might easily permit itself to drift into a position of such dependence on the machines that it would have no practical choice but to accept all of the machines' decisions. As society and the problems that face it become more and more complex, and as machines become more and more intelligent, people will let machines make more and more of their decisions for them, simply because machine-made decisions will bring better results than man-made ones. Eventually, a stage may be reached at which the decisions necessary to keep the system running will be so complex that human beings will be incapable of making them intelligently. At that stage, the machines will be in effective control. People won't be able to just turn the machine off, because they will be so dependent on them that turning them off would amount to suicide. On the other hand, it is possible that human control over the machines may be retained. In that case, the average man may have control over certain private machines of his own, such as his car or his personal computer. But control over large systems of machines would be in the hands of a tiny elite, just as it is today, but with two differences. Due to improved techniques, the elite will have greater control over the masses. Because human work will no longer be necessary, the masses will be superfluous, a useless burden on the system. If the elite is ruthless, they may decide to exterminate the mass of humanity. If they are humane, they may use propaganda or other psychological or biological techniques to reduce the birth rate until the mass of humanity has become extinct, leaving the world to the elite. Or, if the elite consists of soft-hearted liberals, they may decide to play the role of good shepherds to the rest of the human race. They will see to it that everyone's physical needs are satisfied, that all children are raised under psychologically hygienic conditions, that everyone has a wholesome hobby to keep him busy, and that anyone who may become dissatisfied undergoes treatment to cure his problem. Of course, life will be so purposeless that people will have to be biologically or psychologically engineered either to remove their need for the power process or to make them sublimate their drive for power into some harmless hobby. These engineered human beings may be happy in such a society, but they will most certainly not be free. They will have been reduced to the status of domestic animals. But suppose now that the computer scientists do not succeed in developing artificial intelligence, so that human work remains necessary. Even so, machines will take care of more and more of the simpler tasks so that there will be an increasing surplus of human workers at the lower levels of ability. We see this happening already. There are many people who find it difficult or impossible to get work because, for intellectual or psychological reasons, they cannot acquire the level of training necessary to make themselves useful in the present system. On those who are employed, ever-increasing demands will be placed. They will need more and more training, more and more ability, and will have to be more reliable, conforming, and docile, because they will be more and more like cells of a giant organism. Their tasks will be increasingly specialized so that their work will be, in a sense, out of touch with the real world, being concentrated on one tiny slice of reality. The system will have to use any means that it can, whether psychological or biological, to engineer people to be docile, to have the abilities that the system requires, and to sublimate their drive for power into some specialized task. But the statement that the people of such a society will have to be docile may require qualification. The society may find competitiveness useful, provided that ways are found of directing competitiveness into channels that serve the needs of the system. We can imagine a future society in which there is endless competition for positions of prestige and power, but no more than very few people will ever reach the top, where the only real power is. Very repellent is a society in which a person can satisfy his need for power only by pushing large numbers of other people out of the way and depriving them of their opportunity for power. One can envision scenarios that incorporate aspects of more than one of the possibilities that we have just discussed. For instance, it may be that machines will take over most of the work that is of real practical importance, but that human beings will be kept busy by giving relatively unimportant work. It has been suggested, for example, that a great development of the service industries might provide work for human beings. Thus, people would spend their time shining each other's shoes, driving each other around in taxicabs, making handicrafts for one another, waiting on each other's tables, etc. This seems to us a thoroughly contemptible way for the human race to end up, and we doubt that many people would find fulfilling lives in such pointless busy work. They would seek other dangerous outlets, drugs, crime, cults, hate groups, unless they were biologically or psychologically engineered to adapt them to such a way of life. Needless to say, the scenarios outlined above do not exhaust all the possibilities. They only indicate the kinds of outcomes that seem to us most likely. But we can envision no plausible scenarios that are any more palatable than the ones we've just described. It is overwhelmingly probable that if the industrial technological system survives the next 40 to 100 years, it will by that time have developed certain general characteristics. Individuals, at least those of the bourgeois type who are integrated into the system and make it run, and who therefore have all the power, will be more dependent than ever on large organizations. They will become more socialized than ever, and their physical and mental qualities, to a significant extent, possibly to a very great extent, will be those that are engineered into them rather than being the result of chance or God's will or whatever. And whatever may be left of wild nature will be reduced to remnants preserved for scientific study and kept under the supervision and management of scientists. Hence, it will no longer be truly wild. In the long run, say a few centuries from now, it is likely that neither the human race nor any other important organisms will exist as we know them today, because once you start modifying organisms through genetic engineering, there is no reason to stop at any particular point, so that the modifications will probably continue until man and other organisms have been utterly transformed. Whatever else may be the case, it is certain that technology is creating for human beings a new physical and social environment radically different from the spectrum of environments to which natural selection has adapted the human race physically and psychologically. If man is not adjusted to this new environment by being artificially re-engineered, then he will be adapted to it through a long and painful process of natural selection. The former is far more likely than the latter. It would be better to dump the whole stinking system and take the consequences. Strategy. The technophiles are taking us all on an utterly reckless ride into the unknown. Many people understand something of what technological progress is doing to us, yet take a passive attitude towards it because they think it is inevitable. But we don't think it is inevitable. We think it can be stopped, and we will give here some indications of how to go about stopping it. As we stated in paragraph 166, the two main tasks for the present are to promote social stress and instability in industrial society and to develop and propagate an ideology that opposes technology and the industrial system. When the system becomes sufficiently stressed and unstable, a revolution against technology may be possible. The pattern would be similar to that of the French and Russian revolutions. French society and Russian society, for several decades prior to their respective revolutions, showed increasing signs of stress and weakness. Meanwhile, ideologies were being developed that offered a new worldview that was quite different from the old one. In the Russian case, revolutionaries were actively working to undermine the old order. Then, when the old system was put under sufficient additional stress by financial crisis in France, by military defeat in Russia, it was swept away by revolution. What we propose is something along the same lines. It will be objected that the French and Russian revolutions were failures, but most revolutions have two goals. One is to destroy an old form of society, and the other is to set up a new form of society envisioned by the revolutionaries. The French and Russian revolutionaries failed, fortunately, to create the new kind of society of which they dreamed, but they were quite successful in destroying the old society. We have no illusions about the feasibility of creating a new ideal form of society. Our goal is only to destroy the existing form of society.
But an ideology, in order to gain enthusiastic support, must have a positive ideal as well as a negative one. It must be for something as well as against something. The positive ideal that we propose is nature, that is, wild nature. Those aspects of the functioning of the earth and its living things that are independent of human management and free of human interference and control. And with wild nature, we include human nature, by which we mean those aspects of the functioning of the human individual that are not subject to regulation by organized society, but are products of chance or free will or God, depending on your philosophical or religious opinions.
Nature makes a perfect counter-ideal to technology for several reasons. Nature, which is outside the power of the system, is the opposite of technology, which seeks to expand indefinitely the power of the system. Most people will agree that nature is beautiful. Certainly, it has tremendous popular appeal. The radical environmentalists already hold an ideology that exalts nature and opposes technology.
It is not necessary for the sake of nature to set up some chimerical utopia or any new kind of social order. Nature takes care of itself.
It was a spontaneous creation that existed long before any human society, and for countless centuries, many different kinds of human societies coexisted with nature without doing it an excessive amount of damage. Only with the Industrial Revolution did the effect of human society on nature become really devastating. To relieve the pressure on nature, it is not necessary to create some special kind of social system. It is only necessary to get rid of industrial society. Granted, this will not solve all problems. Industrial society has already done tremendous damage to nature and will take a very long time for the scars to heal. Besides, even pre-industrial societies can do significant damage to nature. Nevertheless, getting rid of industrial society will accomplish a great deal. It will relieve the worst of the pressure on nature so that the scars can begin to heal. It will remove the capacity of organized society to keep increasing its control over nature, including human nature. Whatever kind of society may exist after the demise of the industrial system, it is certain that most people will live close to nature, because in the absence of advanced technology, there is no other way people can live. To feed themselves, they must be peasants, or herdsmen, or fishermen, or hunters, etc. And generally speaking, local autonomy should tend to increase, because lack of advanced technology and rapid communications will limit the capacity of governments or other large organizations to control local communities. As for the negative consequences of eliminating industrial society, well, you can't eat your cake and have it too. To gain one thing, you must sacrifice another. Most people hate psychological conflict. For this reason, they avoid doing any serious thinking about difficult social issues, and they like to have such issues presented them in simple black and white terms. This is all good, and that is all bad. The revolutionary ideology should therefore be developed on two levels. On the more sophisticated level, the ideology should address itself to people who are intelligent, thoughtful, and rational. The object should be to create a core of people who will be opposed to the industrial system on a rational, thought-out basis, with full appreciation of the problems and ambiguities involved, and of the price that has to be paid for getting rid of the system. It is particularly important to attract people of this type, as they are capable people and will be instrumental in influencing others. These people should be addressed on as rational a level as possible. Facts should never intentionally be distorted, and intemperate language should be avoided. This does not mean that no appeal can be made to the emotions, but in making such appeal, care should be taken to avoid misrepresenting the truth or doing anything else that would destroy the intellectual respectability of the ideology. On a second level, the ideology should be propagated in a simplified form that will enable the unthinking majority to see the conflict of technology versus nature in unambiguous terms. But even on the second level, the ideology should not be expressed in language that is so cheap, intemperate, or irrational that it alienates people from the thoughtful and rational type. Cheap, intemperate propaganda sometimes achieves impressive short-term gains, but it will be more advantageous in the long run to keep the loyalty of a small number of intelligently committed people than to arouse the passions of an unthinking, fickle mob who will change their attitude as soon as someone comes along with a better propaganda gimmick. However, propaganda of the rabble-rousing type may be necessary when the system is nearing the point of collapse, and there is a final struggle between rival ideologies to determine which will become dominant when the old worldview goes under. Prior to that final struggle, the revolutionaries should not expect to have a majority of people on their side. History is made by active, determined minorities, not by the majority, which seldom has a clear and consistent idea of what it really wants. Until the time comes for the final push toward revolution, the task of revolutionaries will be less to win the shallow support of the majority than to build a small core of deeply committed people. As for the majority, it will be enough to make them aware of the existence of the new ideology and remind them of it frequently, though of course it will be desirable to get majority support to the extent that this can be done without weakening the core of seriously committed people. Any kind of social conflict helps to destabilize the system, but one should be careful about what kind of conflict one encourages. The line of conflict should be drawn between the mass of people and the power-holding elite of the industrial society, politicians, scientists, upper-level business executives, government officials, etc. It should not be drawn between the revolutionaries and the mass of the people. For example, it would be a bad strategy for the revolutionaries to condemn Americans for their habits of consumption. Instead, the average American should be portrayed as a victim of the advertising and marketing industry, which has suckered him into buying a lot of junk that he doesn't need and that is very poor compensation for his lost freedom. Either approach is consistent with the facts. It is merely a matter of attitude whether you blame the advertising industry for manipulating the public or blame the public for allowing itself to be manipulated. As a matter of strategy, one should generally avoid blaming the public. One should think twice before encouraging any other social conflict than that between the power-holding elite, which wields technology, and the general public, over which technology exerts its power. For one thing, other conflicts tend to distract attention from the important conflicts between power elite and ordinary people, between technology and nature. For another thing, other conflicts may actually tend to encourage technologization, because each side in a conflict wants to use technological power to gain advantages over its adversary. This is clearly seen in rivalries between nations. It also appears in ethnic conflicts within nations. For example, in America, many black leaders are anxious to gain power for African Americans by placing black individuals in the technological power elite. They want there to be many black government officials, scientists, corporation executives, and so forth. In this way, they are helping to absorb the African American subculture into the technological system. Generally speaking, one should encourage only those social conflicts that can be fitted into the framework of the conflicts of power elite versus ordinary people, technology versus nature. But the way to discourage ethnic conflict is not through militant advocacy of minority rights. Instead, the revolutionaries should emphasize that although minorities do suffer more or less disadvantage, this disadvantage is of peripheral significance. Our real enemy is the industrial technological system, and in the struggle against the system, ethnic distinctions are of no importance. The kind of revolution we have in mind will not necessarily involve an armed uprising against any government. It may or may not involve physical violence, but it will not be a political revolution. Its focus will be on technology and economics, not politics. Probably the revolutionaries should even avoid assuming political power, whether by legal or illegal means, until the industrial system is stressed to the danger point and has proved itself to be a failure in the eyes of most people. Suppose, for example, that some Green Party should win control of the United States Congress in an election. In order to avoid betraying or watering down their own ideology, they would have to take vigorous measures to turn economic growth into economic shrinkage. To the average man, the results would appear disastrous. There would be massive unemployment, shortages of commodities, etc. Even if the grosser ill effects could be avoided through superhumanly skillful management, still people would have to begin giving up the luxuries to which they have become addicted. Dissatisfaction would grow, the Green Party would be voted out of office, and the revolutionaries would have suffered a severe setback. For this reason, the revolutionaries should not try to acquire political power until the system has gotten itself into such a mess that any hardships will be seen as resulting from the failures of the industrial system itself and not from the policies of the revolutionaries. The revolution against technology will probably have to be a revolution by outsiders, a revolution from below and not from above. The revolution must be international and worldwide. It cannot be carried out on a nation-by-nation basis. Whenever it is suggested that the United States, for example, should cut back on technological progress or economic growth, people get hysterical and start screaming that if we fall behind in technology, the Japanese will get ahead of us. Holy robots! The world will fly off its orbit if the Japanese ever sell more cars than we do. Nationalism is a great promoter of technology. More reasonably, it is argued that if the relatively democratic nations of the world fall behind in technology while nasty dictatorial nations like China, Vietnam, and North Korea continue to progress, eventually the dictators may come to dominate the world. That is why the industrial system should be attacked in all nations simultaneously to the extent that this may be possible. True, there is no assurance that the industrial system can be destroyed at approximately the same time all over the world, and it is even conceivable that the attempt to overthrow the system could lead, instead, to the domination of the system by dictators. That is a risk that has to be taken, and it is worth taking, since the difference between a democratic industrial system and one controlled by dictators is small compared with the difference between an industrial system and a non-industrial one. It might even be argued that an industrial system controlled by dictators would be preferable, because dictator-controlled systems usually have proved inefficient, hence they are presumably more likely to break down. Look at Cuba. Some people take the line that modern man has too much power, too much control over nature. They argue for a more passive attitude on the part of the human race. At best, these people are expressing themselves unclearly because they fail to distinguish between power for large organizations and power for individuals and small groups. It is a mistake to argue for powerlessness and passivity because people need power. Modern man is a collective entity, that is, the industrial system has immense power over nature, and we regard this as evil. But modern individuals and small groups of individuals have far less power than primitive man ever did. Generally speaking, the vast power of modern man over nature is exercised not by individuals or small groups, but by large organizations. To the extent that the average modern individual can wield the power of technology, he is permitted to do so only within narrow limits and only under the supervision and control of the system. You need a license for everything, and with the license comes rules and regulations. The individual has only those technological powers in which the system chooses to provide him. His personal power over nature is slight. Primitive individuals and small groups actually had considerable power over nature, or maybe it would be better to say power within nature. When primitive man needed food, he knew how to find it and prepare edible roots, how to track game and take it with homemade weapons. He knew how to protect himself from heat, cold, rain, dangerous animals, etc. But primitive man did relatively little damage to nature because the collective power of primitive society was negligible compared to the collective power of industrial society. Instead of arguing for powerlessness and passivity, one should argue that the power of the industrial system should be broken, and that this will greatly increase the power and freedom of individuals and small groups. Until the industrial system has been thoroughly wrecked, the destruction of that system must be the revolutionaries' only goal. Other goals would distract attention and energy from the main goal. More importantly, if the revolutionaries permit themselves to have any other goal than the destruction of technology, they will be tempted to use technology as a tool for reaching that other goal. If they give in to that temptation, they will fall right back into the technological trap, because modern technology is a unified, tightly organized system, so that in order to retain some technology, one finds oneself obliged to retain most technology. Hence, one ends up sacrificing only token amounts of technology. Suppose, for example, that the revolutionaries took social justice as a human goal. Human nature being what it is, social justice would not come about spontaneously. It would have to be enforced. In order to enforce it, the revolutionaries would have to retain central organization and control. For that, they would need rapid, long-distance transportation and communication, and therefore all the technology needed to support the transportation and communication systems. To feed and clothe poor people, they would have to use agricultural and manufacturing technology, and so forth. So that the attempt to ensure social justice would force them to retain most parts of the technological system. Not that we have anything against social justice, but it must not be allowed to interfere with the effort to get rid of the technological system. It would be hopeless for revolutionaries to try and attack the system without using some modern technology. If nothing else, they must use the communications media to spread their message. But they should use modern technology for only one purpose: to attack the technological system. Imagine an alcoholic sitting with a barrel of wine in front of him. Suppose he starts saying to himself, "Wine isn't bad for you if you drink in moderation. Why, they say small amounts of wine are even good for you. It won't do me any harm if I just take one little drink." Well, you know what's going to happen. Never forget that the human race with technology is just like an alcoholic with a barrel of wine. Revolutionaries should have as many children as they can. There is strong scientific evidence that social attitudes are to a significant extent inherited. No one suggests that a social attitude is a direct outcome of a person's genetic constitution, but it appears that personality traits are partly inherited, and that certain personality traits tend, within the context of our society, to make a person more likely to hold this or that social attitude. Objections to these findings have been raised, but the objections are feeble and seem to be ideologically motivated. In any event, no one denies that children tend on the average to hold social attitudes similar to those of their parents. From our point of view, it doesn't matter all that much whether the attitudes are passed on genetically or through childhood training. In either case, they are passed on. The trouble is that many of the people who are inclined to rebel against the industrial system are also concerned about the population problems. Hence, they are apt to have few or no children. In this way, they may be handing the world over to the sort of people who support or at least accept the industrial system. To ensure the strength of the next generation of revolutionaries, the present generation should reproduce itself abundantly. In doing so, they will be worsening the population problem only slightly. And the important problem is to get rid of the industrial system, because once the industrial system is gone, the world's population necessarily will decrease. Whereas if the industrial system survives, it will continue developing new techniques of food production that may enable the world's population to keep increasing almost indefinitely. With regard to revolutionary strategy, the only points on which we absolutely insist are that the single overriding goal must be the elimination of modern technology, and that no other goal can be allowed to compete with this one. For the rest, revolutionaries should take an empirical approach. If experience indicates that some of the recommendations made in the foregoing paragraphs are not going to give good results, then those recommendations should be discarded. Two kinds of technology. An argument likely to be raised against our proposed revolution is that it is bound to fail because, it is claimed, throughout history technology has always progressed, never regressed. Hence, technological regression is impossible, but this claim is false. We distinguish between two kinds of technology, which we will call small-scale technology and organization-dependent technology. Small-scale technology is technology that can be used by small-scale communities without outside assistance. Organization-dependent technology is technology that is dependent on large-scale social organization. We are aware of no significant cases of regression in small-scale technology, but organization-dependent technology does regress when the social organization on which it depends breaks down. Example, When the Roman Empire fell apart, the Romans' small-scale technology survived because any clever village craftsman could build, for instance, a water wheel. Any skilled smith could make steel by Roman methods, and so forth. But the Romans' organization-dependent technology did regress. Their aqueducts fell into disrepair and were never rebuilt. Their techniques of road construction were lost. The Roman system of urban sanitation was forgotten, so that not until rather recent times did the sanitation of European cities equal that of ancient Rome. The reason why technology has always seemed to progress is that until perhaps a century or two before the Industrial Revolution, most technology was small-scale technology. But most of the technology developed since the Industrial Revolution is organization-dependent technology. Take the refrigerator, for example. Without factory-made parts or the facilities of a post-industrial machine shop, it would be virtually impossible for a handful of local craftsmen to build a refrigerator. If by some miracle they did succeed in building one, it would be useless to them without a reliable source of electric power. So they would have to dam a stream and build a generator. Generators require large amounts of copper wire. Imagine trying to make that wire without modern machinery. And where would they get gas suitable for refrigeration? It would be much easier to build an ice house or preserve food by drying or picking, as was done before the invention of the refrigerator. So it is clear that if the industrial system were once thoroughly broken down, refrigeration technology would quickly be lost. The same is true of other organization-dependent technology. And once this technology had been lost for a generation or so, it would take centuries to rebuild it, just as it took centuries to build it the first time around. Surviving technical books would be few and scattered. An industrial society, if built from scratch without outside help, can only be built in a series of stages. You need tools to make tools to make tools to make tools. A long process of economic development and social organization is required. And, even in the absence of an ideology opposed to technology, there is no reason to believe that anyone would be interested in rebuilding industrial society. The enthusiasm for progress is a phenomenon peculiar to the modern form of society, and it seems not to have existed prior to the 17th century or thereabouts. In the late Middle Ages, there were four main civilizations that were about equally advanced: Europe, the Islamic world, India, and the Far East, China, Japan, Korea. Three of those civilizations remained more or less stable, and only Europe became dynamic. No one knows why Europe became dynamic at that time. Historians have their theories, but these are only speculation. At any rate, it is clear that rapid development toward a technological form of society occurs only under special conditions, so there is no reason to assume that a long-lasting technological regression cannot be brought about. Would society eventually develop again toward an industrial technological form? Maybe, but there is no use in worrying about it since we can't predict or control events 500 or 1,000 years in the future. Those problems must be dealt with by the people who will live at that time. The danger of leftism. Because of their need for rebellion and for membership in a movement, leftists or persons of similar psychological type are often unattracted to a rebellious or activist movement whose goals and membership are not initially leftist. The resulting influx of leftish types can easily turn a non-leftist movement into a leftist one, so that leftist goals replace or distort the original goals of the movement. To avoid this, a movement that exalts nature and opposes technology must take a resolutely anti-leftist stance and must avoid all collaboration with leftists. Leftism is, in the long run, inconsistent with wild nature, with human freedom, and with the elimination of modern technology. Leftism is collectivist. It seeks to bind together the entire world, both nature and the human race, into a unified whole. But this implies management of nature and of human life by organized society, and it requires advanced technology. You can't have a united world without rapid transportation and communication. You can't make all people love one another without sophisticated psychological techniques. You can't have a planned society without the necessary technological base. Above all, leftism is driven by the need for power, and the leftist seeks power on the collective basis through identification with a mass movement or an organization. Leftism is unlikely to ever give up technology because technology is too valuable a source of collective power. The anarchist too seeks power, but he seeks it on an individual or small group basis. He wants individual and small groups to be able to control the circumstances of their own lives. He opposes technology because it makes small groups dependent on large organizations. Some leftists may seem to oppose technology, but they will oppose it only so long as they are outsiders and the technological system is controlled by non-leftists. If leftism ever becomes dominant in society so that the technological system becomes a tool in the hands of leftists, they will enthusiastically use it and promote its growth. In doing this, they will be repeating a pattern that leftism has shown again and again in the past. When the Bolsheviks in Russia were outsiders, they vigorously opposed censorship and the secret police. They advocated self-determination for ethnic minorities and so forth. But as soon as they came into power themselves, they imposed a tighter censorship and created a more ruthless secret police than any that had existed under the Tsars, and they oppressed ethnic minorities at least as much as the Tsars had done. In the United States a couple of decades ago, when leftists were a minority in our universities, leftist professors were vigorous proponents of academic freedom. But today, in those of our universities where leftists have become dominant, they have shown themselves ready to take away from everyone else's academic freedom. This is political correctness. The same will happen with leftists and technology. They will use it to oppress everyone else if they ever get it under their own control. In earlier revolutions, leftists of the most power-hungry type repeatedly have first cooperated with non-leftist revolutionaries, as well as with leftists of a more libertarian inclination, and later have double-crossed them to seize power for themselves. Robespierre did this in the French Revolution, the Bolsheviks did it in the Russian Revolution, the Communists did it in Spain in 1938, and Castro and his followers did it in Cuba. Given the past history of leftism, it would be utterly foolish for non-leftist revolutionaries today to collaborate with leftists. Various thinkers have pointed out that leftism is a kind of religion. Leftism is not a religion in the strictest sense because leftist doctrine does not postulate the existence of any supernatural being. But for the leftist, leftism plays a psychological role, much like that which religion plays for some people. The leftist needs to believe in leftism. His beliefs are not easily modified by logic or facts. He has a deep conviction that leftism is morally right with a capital R, and that he has not only a right but a duty to impose leftist morality on everyone. However, many of the people we are referring to as leftists do not think of themselves as leftists and would not describe their system of beliefs as leftism. We use the term leftism because we don't know of any better words to designate the spectrum of related creeds that includes the feminists, gay rights, political correctness, etc. movements, and because these movements have a strong affinity with the old left. Leftism is a totalitarian force. Wherever leftism is in a position of power, it tends to invade every private corner and force every thought into a leftist mold. In part, this is because of the quasi-religious character of leftism. Everything contrary to leftist beliefs represents sin. More importantly, leftism is a totalitarian force because of the leftist drive for power. The leftist seeks to satisfy his need for power through identification with a social movement, and he tries to go through the power process by helping to pursue and attain goals of that movement. But no matter how far the movement has gone in attaining its goals, the leftist is never satisfied because his activism is a surrogate activity. That is, the leftist's real motive is not to attain the ostensible goals of leftism. In reality, he is motivated by the sense of power he gets from struggling for and then reaching a social goal. Consequently, the leftist is never satisfied with the goals he has already attained. His need for the power process leads him always to pursue some new goal. The leftist wants equal opportunities for minorities. When that is attained, he insists on statistical equality of achievement by minorities. And as long as anyone harbors, in some corner of his mind, a negative attitude towards some minority, the leftist has to re-educate him. And ethnic minorities are not enough. No one can be allowed to have a negative attitude toward homosexuals, disabled people, fat people, old people, ugly people, and on and on and on. It is not enough that the public should be informed about the hazards of smoking. A warning has to be stamped on every package of cigarettes. Then cigarette advertising has to be restricted, if not banned. The activists will never be satisfied until tobacco is outlawed, and after that it will be alcohol, then junk food, etc. Activists have fought gross child abuse, which is reasonable, but now they want to stop all spanking. When they've done that, they will want to ban something else they consider unwholesome, and then another thing, and then another. They will never be satisfied until they have complete control over all child-rearing practices, and then they will move on to another cause. Suppose you asked leftists to make a list of all the things that were wrong with society. Then suppose you instituted every social change that they demanded. It is safe to say that within a couple years, the majority of leftists would find something new to complain about, some new social evil to correct, because once again, the leftist is motivated less by distress at society's ills than by the need to satisfy his drive for power by imposing his solutions on society. Because of the restrictions placed on their thoughts and behavior by their high level of socialization, many leftists of the over-socialized type cannot pursue power in the ways that other people do. For them, the drive for power has only one morally acceptable outlet, and that is in the struggle to impose their morality on everyone. Leftists, especially those of the over-socialized type, are true believers in the sense of Eric Hoffer's book, The True Believer. But not all true believers are of the same psychological type as leftists. Presumably, a true believing Nazi, for instance, is very different psychologically from a true believing leftist. Because of their capacity for single-minded devotion to a cause, true believers are a useful, perhaps necessary ingredient of any revolutionary movement. This presents a problem with which we must admit we don't know how to deal. We aren't sure how to harness the energies of the true believer to a revolution against technology. At present, all we can say is that no true believer will make a safe recruit to the revolution unless his commitment is exclusively to the destruction of technology. If he is committed also to another ideal, he may want to use technology as a tool for pursuing that other ideal. Some readers may say, this stuff about leftism is a lot of crap. I know John and Jane who are leftish types, and they don't have all these totalitarian tendencies. It's quite true that many leftists, possibly even a numerical majority, are decent people who sincerely believe in tolerating others' values, up to a point, and wouldn't want to use high-handed methods to reach their social goals. Our remarks about leftism are not meant to apply to every individual leftist, but to describe the general character of leftism as a movement. And the general character of a movement is not necessarily determined by the numerical proportions of the various kinds of people involved in the movement. The people who rise to positions of power in leftist movements tend to be leftists of the most power-hungry type, because power-hungry people are those who strive hardest to get into positions of power. Once the power-hungry types have captured control of the movement, there are many leftists of a gentler breed who inwardly disapprove of many of the actions of the leaders, but cannot bring themselves to oppose them. They need their faith in the movement, and because they cannot give up this faith, they go along with the leaders. True, some leftists do have the guts to oppose the totalitarian tendencies that emerge, but they generally lose because the power-hungry types are better organized, are more ruthless and Machiavellian, and have taken care to build themselves a strong power base. These phenomena appeared clearly in Russia and other countries that were taken over by leftists. Similarly, before the breakdown of communism in the USSR, leftish types in the West would seldom criticize that country. If prodded, they would admit that the USSR did many things wrong, but then they would try to find excuses for the communists and begin talking about the faults of the West. They always opposed Western military resistance to communist aggression. Leftish types all over the world vigorously protested the U.S. military action in Vietnam, but when the USSR invaded Afghanistan, they did nothing. Not that they approved of the Soviet actions, but because of their leftist faith, they just couldn't bear to put themselves in opposition to communism. Today, in those of our universities where political correctness has become dominant, there are probably many leftish types who privately disapprove of the suppression of academic freedom, but they go along with it anyway. Thus, the fact that many individual leftists are personally mild and fairly tolerant people by no means prevents leftism as a whole from having a totalitarian tendency. Our discussion of leftism has a serious weakness. It is still far from clear what we mean by the word leftist. There doesn't seem to be much we can do about this. Today, leftism is fragmented into a whole spectrum of activist movements, yet not all activist movements are leftist, and some activist movements, for example, radical environmentalism, seem to include both personalities of the leftist type and personalities of thoroughly unleftist types who ought to know better than to collaborate with leftists. Varieties of leftists fade out gradually into varieties of non-leftists, and we ourselves would often be hard-pressed to decide whether a given individual is a leftist or not a leftist. To the extent that it is defined at all, our conception of leftism is defined by the discussion of it that we have given in this article, and we can only advise the reader to use his own judgment in deciding who is a leftist. But it will be helpful to list some criteria for diagnosing leftism. These criteria cannot be applied in a cut-and-dried manner. Some individuals may meet some criteria without being leftists, and some leftists may not meet any of the criteria. Again, you just have to use your judgment. The leftist is oriented towards large-scale collectivism. He emphasizes the duty of the individual to serve society and the duty of society to take care of the individual. He has a negative attitude toward individualism. He often takes a moralistic tone. He tends to be for gun control, for sex education, and other psychologically enlightened educational methods, for social planning, for affirmative action, for multiculturalism. He tends to identify with victims. He tends to be against competition and against violence, but he often finds excuses for those leftists who do commit violence. He is fond of using the common catchphrases of the left like racism, sexism, homophobia, capitalism, imperialism, neocolonialism, genocide, social change, social justice, social responsibility. Maybe the best diagnostic trait of the leftist is his tendency to sympathize with the following movements: feminism, gay rights, ethnic rights, disability rights, animal rights, political correctness. Anyone who strongly sympathizes with all of these movements is most certainly a leftist. The more dangerous leftists, that is, those who are most power hungry, are often characterized by arrogance or a dogmatic approach to ideology. However, the most dangerous leftists of all may be certain over-socialized types who avoid irritating displays of aggressiveness and refrain from advertising their leftism, but work quietly and unobtrusively to promote collectivist values, enlightened psychological techniques for socializing children, dependence of the individual on the system, and so forth. These crypto-leftists, as we may call them, approximate certain bourgeois types as far as practical action is concerned, but differ from them in psychology, ideology, and motivation. The ordinary bourgeois tries to bring people under the control of the system in order to protect his way of life, or he does so simply because his attitudes are conventional. The crypto-leftist tries to bring people under control of the system because he is a true believer in a collectivist ideology. The crypto-leftist is differentiated from the average leftist of the over-socialized type by the fact that his rebellious impulse is weaker and he is more securely socialized. He is differentiated from the ordinary well-socialized bourgeois by the fact that there is some deep lack within him that makes it necessary for him to devote himself to a cause and immerse himself in a collectivity. And maybe his well-sublimated drive for power is stronger than that of the average bourgeois. Final note. Throughout this article, we've made imprecise statements, and statements that ought to have had all sorts of qualifications and reservations attached to them. And some of our statements may be flatly false. Lack of sufficient information and the need for brevity made it impossible for us to formulate our assertions more precisely or add all the necessary qualifications. And of course, in a discussion of this kind, one must rely heavily on intuitive judgment, and that can sometimes be wrong. So we don't claim that this article expresses more than a crude approximation of the truth. All the same, we are reasonably confident that the general outlines of the picture we have painted here are roughly correct. Just one weak point needs to be mentioned. We have portrayed leftism in its modern form as a phenomenon peculiar to our time and as a symptom of the disruption of the power process. But we might possibly be wrong about this. Over-socialized types who try to satisfy their drive for power by imposing their morality on everyone have certainly been around for a long time. But we think that the decisive role played by feelings of inferiority, low self-esteem, powerlessness, identification with victims by people who are not themselves victims, is a peculiarity of modern leftism. Identification with victims by people not themselves victims can be seen to some extent in 19th century leftism and in early Christianity, but as far as we can make out, symptoms of low self-esteem, etc., were not nearly so evident in these movements or in any other movements as they are in modern leftism. But we are not in a position to assert confidently that no such movements have existed prior to modern leftism. This is a significant question to which historians ought to give their attention.
Be sure to check out Syllogism Podcast Episode 5 for our analysis on this manuscript. And if you enjoyed this reading, do me a solid, like and subscribe.